Welcome to Season 4 of UX Banter, your portal to insightful conversations with design illuminaries. We are back with even more engaging discussions with design leaders, delving into their experiences and inspirations. Get ready for fresh insights as we explore the latest trends and challenges in the industry. With me, your host, Dushyant Kanungo. This podcast is presented by Galaxy UX Studio and powered by Galaxy Weblinks, an Inc. 5000 organization. Hello, everyone. Our guest today is a digital expert with 27 years of experience. He's a renowned customer experience consultant, conversion optimization specialist, and UX prototyping visionary. He has authored 6 books and pioneered the first ever podcast on web design. As an international speaker and contributor to various publications, he excels in enhancing customer experience, boosting conversion rates. His data-driven strategies help businesses streamline touchpoints and increase revenue. Offering training, audits, and strategic guidance, he empowers organizations to embrace a potential people-first experience for business success. Please welcome founding partner of Boagworks, Paul Boag.
Who's this amazing person you're having on the show? He sounds great. Let's talk to him instead.
We are thrilled to have you on our show, and it has been, a privilege to get to people who have been extraordinary in our field. And personally, it is my privilege to, through this podcast, to explore their journeys. So welcome once again.
Thank you very much. You were too kind in the introduction. I've never been introduced that well to make me sound so good. Good job.
Thank you. So, Paul, what has been the journey like? I mean, you obviously started at a time when UX wasn't even a term. And I think you in UK, you started off at Dorset, and then you are a graduate from Portsmouth University. And back in the day, how was it? How was the life and how the journey was? Because, you graduated very earlier on before the technology was even a thing. And
Yeah.
here we are now.
Yeah. And serendipitous luck, a lot of it feels like looking back on it. But then, luck is basically the ability to grab opportunities when they arise, isn't it, really? So, yeah, I kind of stumbled into it, if I'm being honest. I was at university studying graphic design because, as you say, there was no internet, no digital design back then. There were personal computers were beginning to emerge, but not many people had them in their home at that stage. And so while I was my course one day in the university, I saw a note pinned to a notice board that said IBM were looking for students to take a year out and go and work for them on their first ever multimedia PC. So that's the first PC with a sound card and CD-ROM that IBM produced, because they were personal computer manufacturers back then. And so I thought I'd apply, and I got down to the last 2, and I didn't get it. I didn't get the job. And so I booked myself a holiday to go away with some holiday. And then a couple of weeks later, they rang back and said, we've decided to take 2 people instead of 1. So would you still be interested? At which point I said yes. And yeah, I spent 3 years with them. Started off designing icons. That was it. That was all I was allowed to design. And that was when icons could only be 16 colors, was the entire palette that I had to work with. So I worked on that for obviously the year that I was there as an industrial placement student. And then towards the end of that year, we started to get a few people coming along and saying things like, do you know anything about this internet thing? Can you build us a website? To which my boss said, yeah, we can help you with that. And then took one look at it and saw how incredibly dull it was, because at that stage it was grey backgrounds with, the image tag had just been introduced. There was no formatting, there was no layout, nothing like that. And so immediately offloaded it onto the poor lowly student, which was myself. And that's how I got into web design.
So first
Um,
website from IBM that
yeah,
came up
yeah,
was done by you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Some of the very early stuff from IBM. Yeah, we had third-party clients as well. Rank, that did the film distribution. I don't think they're even a thing anymore. Their website I did lots of different websites in those early days, but really it wasn't a design job. It was the ability to code HTML, and not even CSS. No such thing as CSS.
Right. I myself got into CSS very late in the game, actually, after 2 years of working when inline styling. And then one of the managers said that, do you know you can actually get it separated? And then there's thing called CSS files that can be included. And later on, I went for an interview and somebody said, can you design a website without tables? And I'm like, You're mad. How can you create that structure just using divs?" And I
I,
wasn't
I
what divs did.
I have a very I got into it very early. Again, luck, right? I got into it incredibly early on by complete accident, right? So I was running an agency at that point. Well, no, I wasn't running it, but I was a part of this agency. And we won a client called the National Trust, which is a big client in the UK. They're very well known. And they said, we need our website to be accessible. Can you make it accessible? And I went, yes, of course I can, knowing nothing about accessibility at all at the time. Um, and so after we won the project, I had a little freak out because I realized I had to make this site accessible. So I bought a book that I thought was going to help me make the site accessible. Turns out it was nothing to do with accessibility. Well, not directly. It was Jeffrey Zeldman's book, Designing with Web Standards, which was the kind of introductory. That he introduced the idea of CSS-based design to the world, really, in this book. And so I got the book and I read it, and I sat there going, "Well, I'm stuffed now. I've got to just completely relearn the way I build websites from the ground up." And so, I started building with CSS very early on. That would have been 2001, maybe
Uh-huh.
something like that. And then even that led on to another big turning point in my career, because he then Jeffrey Zeldman was speaking at a conference in London in 2005, and I just had to go and see him. Right, I was in awe of this guy. I thought he was an incredible guy, and so it was the first ever web standards conference. And for those young whippersnappers that don't know, web standards was a big kind of movement amongst developers and designers to force browsers to start introducing CSS and HTML and to standardize the languages, because before that, IE6 would behave completely different to Netscape Navigator. That would be so this web standards movement was a big deal. So I went along to this conference, and I was sitting there, and I was, they did a blog roll where they said to the audience, oh, PPK, you write your blog, stand up so everybody can see you, and you write your blog, stand up. And all these different people would stand up. And one of my heroes I discovered was sitting next to me, right? I read his blog religiously. He was like, and I came away from that conference going, I need to start blogging, right?
Mhm.
And so I came out of that and I thought, I want to be a part of this. It was a really exciting time, lots of innovation, lots of change. So I came away, I'm going to blog. And then I discovered that actually at the time, I sucked at writing. I've written 6 books now, so it seems somewhat ironic. But at the time, I was terrible. I hated it. It was horrible. And so, but I'd started this blog, and then that led me into podcasting. And so I ended up being the first person to ever do a web design podcast, because although I couldn't write, as you'll have already gathered, I can talk a lot. So the podcast worked great for me.
I mean, writing wise, I mean, I always believe like any other skill, if you continue writing for some time, it develops. And same thing with podcasting. It's always
Yeah.
a process. If you just define it, it's the refinements that come over a period of time. So anybody who is listening or watching this, if you have this urge after hearing that, so
That's
anybody
right.
who is listening and getting inspired by those wonderful words, if you want to start, start small. It doesn't have to be the blockbuster going viral podcast or blog that you have to write. You have to just start. If you start doing it, you will get better over time.
Yeah. And also to begin with, nobody's going to be reading it or listening to it anyway. You're not going to have an audience to begin with. So you could be as rubbish as you like. My first podcast, oh, it's so done. The first ever podcast I did was just me by myself. Eventually, I had a co-host that I used to do it with, a guy called Marcus Lillington, who's brilliant. And that's when the podcast took off, was when Marcus joined it, because there was suddenly a banter and a back and forth between us. But before that, it was me sitting there going, oh, today we're going to talk about PDFs. My first podcast was about PDFs. That's how dull it was.
So before even starting, and I got this number, I did my research to realize that how many people actually are going to watch or listen, and the number was 20 on average if you are doing this.
Yeah,
That was,
absolutely.
that's the international number, 20 listeners. And then they said that, but then again, the threshold is to become a successful podcaster that you have to cross the 7 episode mark. If you can
Yeah.
cross that, then you can say you call yourself a podcaster, because otherwise it's just something that you tried.
Well, to
But
be honest, it took me 4 years before the podcast really caught on. Partly because in the very early days, nobody knew what podcasting was. So I mean that made it harder. But it took me 4 years, and then we kind of we for about 4 years we got up to about 600 people that would listen to it regularly. And then it just went ballistic. At that point, suddenly everybody was much more aware of podcasting. There wasn't a lot of choice with web design podcasts, unlike today. And so, it shot up to, I think it was 250,000 per episode at its height. And that
man,
was just crazy biscuits. And then, of course, every time you make a mistake, and screw up, oh, it's so embarrassing when there's 250,000 people listening to it.
so you were talking about the nostalgic part about the web standards. I remember those days when we have to be really careful about tags, because certain browsers will support, certain browsers will definitely not. And then you have to apply fallbacks that if this CSS fails, what the other property that we are going to apply. So when I worked in Malmesbury for Dyson, my job was to ensure that anything that we are creating works on IE6.
IE6, people don't understand the pain that IE6 was. But there's also another group of people that, for me, maybe that came at it slightly earlier for me. IE6 was a savior. IE6 changed everything because it was the first browser that reliably supported CSS. It's
Right.
just that then Microsoft decided not to update Internet Explorer 6 for like years and years.
Never did. Actually, they started this campaign that if you or anybody you know who still uses IE6, help them move to another advanced browser. And we were looking at reports and say we are still getting 20 hits per day on IE6. So we still need to support it. And then somebody suggested, are we the ones who are causing those hits? Are we internally, by just testing it, we are hiding onto the data?
Oh dear. Yeah, that's brilliant, isn't it?
It was crazy time. But yeah, so even after that, fun banter and being the pioneer in this field, when the proper user experience came to be, and I think
Mm,
that is something that you are very passionate about, is about
mm.
how to sell UX to non-UX people, or how to sell UX to organizations. Can you please guide us that how do you do it, and what are the tips that we can learn from you on the topic?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a really interesting one because, obviously, user experience is relatively well respected now, but it's still not uncommon to come across people that just don't value it or don't appreciate it. And I think the biggest mistake that user experience designers or people who care about the user experience make is that they can come across as almost a bit fanatical and a bit kind of, will no one think of the user? It's like, and the truth is most people don't care about it. They care about meeting their targets. They care about getting their end of year bonus. They care about going home at the end of the day. They don't care about users as long as they get what, the business needs and fulfill their job. And so we try desperately to persuade them. But another kind of pioneer in user experience is a guy called Jared Spool. I don't know. He's an amazing guy. I've got, in awe of him. And he wrote an excellent post one day with the really catchy title of Why I Can't Convince an Executive of Anything and Neither Can You, right? And he basically said, just like you have, people come to him all the time and say, how do you persuade people to care about user experience? And his argument is, you don't, right? You find out what they already care about, right? Is it meeting their end of year target? Is it getting that next promotion? Is it whatever, right? Whatever they care about. And then you demonstrate how good user experience design can help get them there. So, by way of an example, if I'm talking to a finance director, I will talk about the cost savings that come from user experience design, how you avoid building products that fail, how it can help increase word of mouth recommendations, which reduce marketing spend, how it can, enable more efficiency in the way that you work internally, which reduces overheads, right? When I'm talking to the head of IT, I'm talking about, how user experience design won't waste your developers' time building stuff that only has to be changed later when you discover it doesn't work. When I'm talking to the marketing director, I'm talking about brand recognition going up, customer satisfaction going up, NPS scores going up, those kinds of things. So really, I don't ever talk about the user, right? I talk about the things that my stakeholders care about, and I frame it within that context. And the end result is the same, right? The user experience is improved. It's just you don't present it in that way. You don't talk about it in that way.
Wow, this recording is going to my sales team before editing. Uh,
It's true. It's such a big mistake that everybody makes. And you don't need to talk about the user to sell user experience design. You talk about the benefits that it provides the business.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of people miss on the point that even while you're trying to sell something, they become your users. So identifying their persona and needs and putting them first is always the key when you start selling. And how do you document it? I mean, if I have to say put in words and you're approaching it, so it has to be done in the similar fashion, say on the website that if you're putting
Yeah.
these.
Yeah. I mean, if you go to my website, my services page, I don't think I talk about users much or making the experience of users better. I don't, that's not the emphasis of what I'm talking about. All the time, I'm talking about the business benefits that come from the work that I do. Now, the work I do happens to be around user experience design, but user experience design is the methodology and the technique that allows me to deliver business results, right? So, because I think some user experience designers can be so naive. They think that, oh, if you just make the user experience wonderful, then business success will follow. But by that logic, you would give the product away for free because that's the best user experience. You're not going to make people happier than giving away the product for free, but you're going to go out of business. So, it actually goes back to, believe it or not, something I learned at university, where, which before the internet even existed. I remember one of my tutors saying to me, the difference between art and design is that design delivers, right? It delivers something tangible for a business client. And that's the same true. User experience design isn't art. It doesn't exist for its own sake. It exists to deliver a business goal, a business thing, right? And so if it doesn't deliver that business thing, then it's failed. And a lot of people talk about, the tension between business needs and user needs, right? I don't think there is a tension. I think the business needs always has to win out. But, and this is the but, I think a lot of times the businessy people maybe think too short term, right? That, they go for short term gain rather than long term benefit. And it's when you think too short term, you get immediate business results, but you cripple the business by damaging the user experience over the long term. Does that make sense?
It does. It perfectly does. And I was about to say that we got the excerpts and the quote of this podcast in the last few sentences that you said. And it definitely, takes away a lot. And it's a deep thought that what is the place where you come into the field thinking you are a creative individual, and suddenly, so art is artist's own expression, whereas design is a solution that you're providing to
Yeah.
a problem. And that differentiator always works. So if anybody can understand that we are the solutions provider, there are other avenues to express ourselves. It leads to the career and user and customer success that people always strive for. I mean, that is where the revenue and the business is driven. So anybody who wishes to follow Paul on more of his thoughts on the topic, bogworld.com is the website, or your blog.
You're
There.
going to have to spell that. People will never get it otherwise. It's BOAG world.com. My surname's impossible to pronounce and
It's on
spell.
screen and also in the captions, so you guys can follow that. And with that historic podcast that we are referring to is called Bog World Show. So you can Google it on all the platforms to get the access. And trust me, if that journey, if you are going to follow, then I think from the beginning you will understand that how the world was back in the day. I mean, and well, not back in the day. I'm not going to say that, but I
Well,
want.
no, you're right. But the reason I was shaking my head is because I do wonder, do people really need to know? Great, great. The past is wonderful, but it's like often I talk about. Sorry, I'm making this podcast too long. Your editor will have to edit it down. But one of the things that always made me, that I'm always going, oh, I've got 27 years experience or 30 years experience or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but really probably only 5 of those years matter because so much changes so fast on the web that actually what happened 25 years ago really doesn't matter so much. But
But even
I'm writing a newsletter on that at the moment. That's why it's in my head.
but even on that thought, if you just, I'm just coming today from my office with long discussions about how we are going to change our entire design process with AI. And the AI will be part of the process when we are gathering the requirements to making the delivery. It's not transferring the job to the AI, but enabling our current task using AI so that the impact is visible in terms of the documentation that we are creating, or the questions we are asking, or the final design deliverables as they are going with quality. So the changes, the way that we started work, as you just mentioned, that we didn't have any idea what CSS was in the beginning. And even you started even before that. So the times have changed. The tools have changed. Many tools have just came and gone, like Flash and
Yeah. Cold
Fire.
Fusion. Do you remember Cold
Cold
Fusion?
Fusion, yeah, it was from Adobe.
Yeah.
Companies like Macromedia, they used to rule the roost. Now nobody knows their name, even if you are talking to the younger generation. So with that experience, we do realize that tools will come and go. You cannot depend upon the tools and the tech because it will always change. The human factor has always been the driving force in all the scenarios, and it will remain the same. With just
Yeah,
the adaptability in you is the only thing that is going to keep you alive and moving ahead.
yeah, yeah, totally agree.
All right, so rapid fire time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have lost my rapid fire cards. So
Oh
I
no.
some of them written on the screen that I'm going to read from here.
Okay, that's fine. You go for it.
No, those cards have been a constant since last season, last three seasons. And I was looking at something here. I thought that they were on my desk, but they are not. So here comes the question. Question one to begin. What's your favorite pastime?
Traveling. I've spent a long time building my business in such a way that I spend half of my year now traveling around North America in an RV. So I love going new places and seeing new things. So I'm at home at the moment, but that is the exception rather than the rule these days.
You said an RV.
Yeah,
Okay. That must be amazing, the new experiences too. Cool.
they're probably one of the best days of my life, or my best work day of my life, let's say that, was getting up, getting my laptop, going and sitting outside of my motorhome in the middle of a dried up lake bed, 100 miles from the nearest civilization, connected to the internet via a Starlink, and having a Zoom meeting. If you've got to have a Zoom meeting, that's the way to have a Zoom meeting.
Amazing. What is your favorite word?
Favorite word? Yes. I never say no to clients, which amazes many people. I'm very much a positive person, and so even if somebody suggests something stupid, I always say, yeah, we can do that, but how are we going to deal with these consequences? How are we going to deal with this scenario or that scenario or whatever else? So I like to say yes. I like to say in another life, I'm sure I would have been what do they call it? Where people do comedy live and
Eh?
spontaneously, and it's the name of it's gone out, improvisation, where they say you should, it's always yes and somebody
Yes.
else says something, you agree with it and then build upon it. That's my attitude.
And if somebody has to read one Paul Boag book out of six, which one would you recommend and why?
Depends on who's reading it. I would say, bearing in mind we're UX banter, right? And we're talking to UX professionals, I think I would go with the User Experience Revolution. And the User Experience Revolution is basically a book about how to introduce user experience best practice to your organization, how to get them to adopt it and bring it on board. So I think for this audience, I'll go User Experience Revolution.
And any other book that you think that it may not be UX, maybe UX, any
Yeah.
other book that you would like to?
I love a book. I mean, I could go off and start talking about sci-fi books and things like that, but let's keep it vaguely related to our topic, shall we? I love there is a book, it's not an easy book, but there is a book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow.
Yeah.
And it's a psychology book that kind of explains how we think and we process information. And I think for us as UX designers, it is incredibly valuable to understand the psychology around this and about how the difference between our conscious mind and our conscious decision making and our unconscious decision making. And it introduces things like cognitive load, it introduces things like procedural knowledge, all of that kind of stuff. Found that a fascinating book, and I really should read it again because I loved it so much.
Definitely. And are you a morning person or evening person?
Oh, evening. I don't understand morning people. They're unnatural and freakish as far as I'm concerned.
Nowadays, my dog wakes me up at 6 a.m. and
Okay, I'm going to hang up on you now. 6 a.m. 6 a.m.
I generally I wouldn't get up on my own. It's just my dog. He just starts punching me. Does get up. I need to go out. and he just turned like 3 and developed this habit of waking me up at 6 in the morning. But
That needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. That's unacceptable.
absolutely. All right, window or aisle seat?
Aisle. Aisle, because I'm a man of a certain age that needs to pee a lot.
But and I think the next question is redundant because you're British, that tea or coffee, there is no competition, right?
Neither, right? Is the truth. I don't drink tea or coffee because I don't know. I don't like either of them. And it is totally unacceptable being British, as you say, not to like tea. And it will, especially with elderly relatives, it causes all kinds of conflicts because they offer you a cup of tea and you say no, and then they don't know what to do. It's like the whole universe is just ground to a halt, because they've never experienced somebody turning down a cup of tea before. So yeah, no, neither actually. But if I had to pick, I'd pick tea.
All right. And so I believe if that happens, if we ever get to meet in person, I'd rather buy you a pint then.
Yes, now you're talking. Yeah, absolutely. I'd much rather go with a pint than a tea or coffee.
All right. So with that, I close the section of rapid fire because now we know that you are a very adventurous person who likes to have, go on drives and work from remote scenic locations and enjoy a pint or two. So I think that actually is quite a thing. So nobody should schedule early morning meetings with you. That is
Yeah,
another thing that people must be aware
that's
of.
the thing. That's one thing that kills me when I go to the States because I have a lot of obviously, I have a lot of European clients. I have a lot of American ones as well, but a lot in Europe. And so when I'm in America, I have to get up early to do calls with my European clients, and that does not make me happy.
Well, the cost of doing international business.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it becomes harder for us as well because in India, if I'm working with somebody in Pacific time zone, it's just 12 and a half hours difference. And I don't know how it happens, but it becomes a bit difficult. I mean, they have to wake up early and then we have to actually extend time. But this is the way the business is done because at
Yeah.
one end, your people you're working with in Taiwan of the same organization, and the same organization is also working from San Jose. So
Part of the game, isn't it, really?
part of the game. So, with that, any advice that you would like to give to anybody who is just starting out? Because I speak with a lot of students, I do mentoring a lot and with ADP list, and I keep, I get these questions repeatedly that
Yeah.
if somebody was there to guide you, what would advice you would give to yourself back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, that's two different questions because obviously back in the day, as we keep saying, was a very different world. So I think it's, the advice I would give somebody who was entering the market today is very different to the advice I would give back then. I mean, I do a lot of coaching as well, although admittedly most of my coaching is with people like you that run agencies. But when I am asked that question, I think there are a couple of things to focus on. The first is ignore all those jobs that say you have to have 5 years experience, right? It's like they always say, oh, must have X. I saw a job post recently that said 8 years experience for a junior UX designer. That's just ridiculous. So my advice, because of what we were saying earlier, that actually, a lot of the experience that I have is no longer relevant. Some of it is actually a handicap because I think you can become institutionalized or fixed in certain ways of working, and also you can be inflexible and all of those things. There's downsides that come with experience. So when you read a job ad that says 5 years experience, don't let that put you off of applying. But make sure that when you apply, you are the most enthusiastic, the most passionate, the most committed to winning that role, and make all the people with more experience look stale, stuck in their ways, and boring. So that's one piece of advice. The other piece of advice I would give is where you invest your time and energy. And this comes back to something you said earlier, which is that technology comes and goes, right? And I see a lot of people get very invested in, oh, I'm going to learn about the, new version of Figma's just come out. Oh, I'm going to spend hours learning all the new bits and bobs in Figma, or I'm going to learn this latest new, programming language, or whatever else it is. And I'm not saying that those things have no value. They absolutely do. But the skills that will last you a lifetime are those people skills, those soft skills, right? And also, those are the skills that help you progress in your career. Once you hit kind of middle management and above, really, it's all soft skills. It's all the ability to empathize, to understand other people's thinking, to interact with people, to be able to sell ideas and concepts. All of those skills are not only great from a career point of view, they're also the backbone of what it means to be a user experience designer. Our job is to empathize. Our job is to motivate other people. Our job is to help other people. Those soft skills don't change. But as you said, technology comes and goes.
All right. One thing that you also mentioned when we spoke last, it was something to do with conversion optimization. So that it may be a step back or forward, or maybe we need to move this section a bit up in the edit. Can you talk more about it?
Yeah, I mean, user experience for me, my interest in conversion optimization came directly off of the back of the work I was doing in user experience design. So, as I started to talk about the business benefits of user experience design rather than about, oh, well, no one think of the user. As I started to talk about that, I realized that the main benefits of user experience design were actually in encouraging people to act, but doing so in an ethical way, in a way, ethical, get rid of the word ethical, right? Because yes, it does, but there is you see a lot of marketers use, understandably so, because they're under pressure, but a lot of marketers use quite manipulative approaches to get people to act, to improve their conversion rate. And so there are these things called deceptive design patterns, or dark patterns, as they're often referred to. And these things work in the short term, right? They do. Statistically, they give you the results. But there is this presumption that people don't know they're being manipulated, and they do. They're aware. You've been to, I'm sure everybody listening to this has been to websites where it said only 5 left in stock. And you go, yeah, is there really, or am I just being manipulated here? So those kinds of things will come back to bite you. And so as I started to understand marketing more, understand the kind of deceptive techniques that were being used more, I began to realize that actually user experience design can be more effective and leave customers happier at the end of the day than these kinds of techniques. So, things like reducing people's cognitive load so that they find the experience more pleasurable, more easier to use, means that it will improve conversion rate. So really, my whole view on conversion rate optimization is, if you create an outstanding user experience, you remove those friction points, you put people in a more positive mindset, they will convert more. And probably as well as if you were using these more manipulative techniques, and you'll have less returns and you'll have less complaints afterwards. And so that's what my book Click is about. And so after I wrote User Experience Revolution, my next book was Click, which had the strap line, encouraging clicks without shady tricks.
So isn't that just goes against the psychology principle that everybody's using, is creating an urgency around whatever you are
Yeah.
persuade users to.
So you can actually use that. It is okay to create a sense of urgency if there is a genuine urgency, right? The problem is that often that's a fake urgency. So I've been to websites before that have this countdown timer that ticks away, And and then you come back a day later and it's reset and it's counting down again. People aren't idiots. They know when they're being manipulated. They know when these techniques are being used on them. And even with a sense of urgency, it's a double-edged sword, because even if there is a genuine urgency there, it's not about the reality, it's about the perception, right? If someone perceives that as an attempt to manipulate them, you're going to undermine the relationship, you're going to reduce the chance of closing a sale, and you're going to, and ultimately you're going to, you might even if you bounce people into making that purchase, they may be disgruntled afterwards because they felt rushed in making that purchase. You might get bad reviews, you might get more returns, you might get problems like that. So you have to be incredibly careful with these psychological tools. But there are a whole set of psychological tools that are not about manipulating people, but rather about empowering people, right? So, for example, I work with a lot of charities, okay? One of the big problems that you have when you ask somebody to make a charitable donation, if you ask people, 96% of people will say, I want to give more to charity, right? 96, okay? But actually, charitable donations has been constantly in decline, okay? Now, you could argue that that's cost of living crisis and all of these kinds of things. But the reality is in the West, we're very affluent. We can afford to donate, right? But we don't. And the reason we don't at that point action is because of a very ancient part of our brain, which basically kicks off a survival instinct. So when we part with something, okay, everything in our animal brain is screaming, don't give that up. You need that. That keeps you alive. That protects you. And there's something called loss aversion, where we feel the loss of something twice as much as the gain of the same equivalent thing, right? So what you can do in those kinds of situations is you can not wake the animal part of the brain, because the animal part of the brain lives in the present. So you could do something like a Give More Tomorrow campaign, where you sign up to give in the future, maybe when you get your next pay rise. And that will enable people to do the thing they say they want to do through but their own psychology is preventing them. And then there are also things like cognitive load, and there's loads of psychological ways that you can help somebody have a good experience and make a purchase without resorting to manipulative techniques that ultimately just alienate them.
Wow. So I think it was brilliant, eye-opening conversation, and those insights are, I think, anybody who is listening, being it somebody who is just starting out their career, somebody who has a lot of experience in the field, everybody would enjoy this conversation. So with that, I would like to thank you, Paul, for joining podcast. And I hope that you had a good time as much as, I enjoyed it personally.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I hope that, if anybody has got any questions about this stuff, I'm quite happy to give out my email address, paul@boagworld.com. I'm happy to chat with people. So anytime you've got a question, just drop me an email and I'll do my best to help.
Oh, you're very kind. And to all the listeners, thank you very much for tuning in, watching it, and listening in your car. Now it's time to get to the office because the traffic has cleared up. So see you with a new guest in the next episode. Till then, have a good day.